You're listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, brought to you by the Raven Creek Social Club, where we talk about faith and other oddities. For questions, comments, or to be part of the conversation, join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find us at Raven Creek SC. Now for your hosts, Emily Dixon and Nathan Underwood.
Welcome back to Faith and Other Oddities. We are back in the studio. Emily's been out for a couple of weeks, but you wouldn't know that because we've been delivering episode after episode.
I'm quite proud of ourselves, quite frankly.
Hey, you know, we've managed to stay on track somehow with all the craziness that goes on. But that's not why you're here. You're here to hear us talk about the Bible, not our crazy lives. So
that works because we're going to talk about Bible craziness. So, you know.
Yeah. Well, we just got through the last story in Judges, which might make you think that we're done, but no, we have more. We're actually going to go through and just kind of hit some of the high points, do kind of some recaps and whatnot of just things that we didn't want to detract from the narrative. We wanted to get through that and go basically hit some of the little rabbit trails that we wanted to go down, but felt like we should put the whole story together before we pick apart details.
Yeah, because a lot of this stuff actually goes beyond the text, and it's stuff that I had to go into some really crazy places to find. Had to be careful not to slide off into Christian Middle Earth, as Heiser calls it, or beyond. I think there's an abyss out there on the internet that will take you to places you don't want to go. And these are the kinds of topics that get you there. But we wanted to address them because we did bring them up. I'm going to kick off with the Jewish Zodiac, because I think that's a topic that, number one, a lot of people aren't familiar with.
Right, yeah. I know very little about it.
Well, and the other thing is, if people do know about it, they know about it because there's a clickbait headline on an article for Facebook.
Sure.
And, you know, that's a start to kind of say there is something to this. But there's more to the story. There always is. So even more to the story than what I'm going to present today. So basically, it was believed that Judaism really didn't have any place for astrology up until the Middle Ages. They believed that astrology was the result of Hindu and Muslim influence during the 9th century that really just came to a head during the 13th century.
Okay.
So there was a lot of books written at that point by different rabbis about the pros and cons of the Zodiac. And so basically Bible scholars blew it off because it's not part of our timeline.
Right. Well, the Zodiac kind of gets a bad rap with the horoscopes and astrology and things like that, which I guess we're going to
we're going to talk
a little bit about that, but we tend to think of like the horoscope and the newspaper and the astrological signs and things like that. So,
and we want to kind of look at where Judaism kind of makes a break from all of that. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things to remember about the Zodiac is people didn't have wall calendars. They didn't have watches.
Right.
You didn't know how to judge times and seasons unless you were looking at the planets. And so that's all going to play in. But basically what happened was, after we kind of discounted this as anything really having to do with Judaism, Second Temple lit, or anything like that, somebody went out to a cave and discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this just totally set off an entirely new interest in the Zodiac. And,
just to back up, so I know we've mentioned it before, but for anyone who hasn't been around the whole series, the Dead Sea Scrolls, I didn't realize how unpopular they are for a long time, because this was the stuff that they were just kind of really big news in the 90s amongst Christian nerds. And so the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered allegedly by a shepherd who knocked a rock into a cave entrance and heard a pot shatter and went in to investigate, and they found these scrolls. And so during the time that before they were translated thoroughly, most of the scrolls, I mean, they're still finding all kinds of stuff all the time, but when they were first discovered, before the bulk of them were translated, Oh man, the conspiracy theorists were in full. I don't know how. I mean, they were out and they were saying, oh, this is amazing. These are older scrolls than any biblical material we've ever found, and most of them were convinced they were going to find material that contradicted the biblical material that we have. And what they found is that most of the scrolls, older dates, actually match most of the Masoretic text at what we have today. So I think that's really pretty amazing. And I love that it was like, oh my goodness, it was like this gotcha moment for the,
right.
for the skeptics.
Oh, they were going to disprove Christianity with it. And we find out, no, that's not what it does at all.
Right. Yeah. And it wasn't all scriptures. I mean, there were scriptures, but then there were also like community rules for the people in these various sects of Judaism. So if you want more on that, check out Miriam Brand. We've mentioned her before. Her podcast goes into a lot of detail on what's contained in a lot of these scrolls.
Her podcast name is Understanding Sin and Evil. So you can find it under her name, or if you don't know how to spell Miriam Brand, Understanding Sin and Evil. I think most people get that.
Yeah.
And actually what you said, I kind of have to do a little teaser, is going to come into play when we kick off our next book, 1 Samuel.
Okay.
Because the Dead Sea Scrolls come into major play with how we translate Samuel and the Septuagint, and there's just this whole saga of translation work that goes on there. So anyway, we'll get into that later. But yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls, they translated them and they began to find different references to the Zodiac. And one of the documents called Q cryptic, so K4 from Qumran, cryptic because the way it's written describes a man's personality and characteristics based on his zodiac sign.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I had no idea that it was that involved.
Oh, it gets way involved depending on how far you take it. Now, at first, this was kind of dismissed as a one-off, and everybody thought, oh, no big deal. It's not there's a lot of writing in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Not everything was endorsed. That was preserved. But at the same time, it was there. But then they started finding similarities with the community rule scroll.
Okay.
And that is a major work. So we began to think that maybe this isn't a one-off. Maybe there is something to it. And since these scrolls can be dated back to the 1st century, we know that this was something that was going on during the time that Jesus was alive.
Right.
And probably a lot earlier than that. So that called for a reexamination and a reinterpretation of some other finds that were going on. We have these Palestinian synagogues. And so this is in the area, the same place where the Philistines were during Samson's time.
Sure.
And they had mosaic designs on their floor. Now,
like mosaic is in the art style and not as in Moses.
Precisely. I guess we should clarify that.
I mean, I guess there might have been some of Moses, but who knows?
Well, we have the Ark of the Covenant. We have the menorah. We have the binding of Isaac.
We have depictions of the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes. And all of these very Jewish symbols that are in these synagogues. So we know that they're Jewish places of worship. However, a lot of them will have a zodiac. And in the middle of it, not only do you have there's 2 rings. Okay, let's just describe it. There's 2 rings, and inside those 2 rings are the signs, the 12 signs of the seasons or the months. On each corner, the 4 corners, is a woman representing each season.
Okay.
In the center of it is what has been believed to be Helios, the Greek god of the sun. So, as you can imagine, this is like massively confusing for scholars.
Right. Yeah, and this would have been believed that this would have been due to Israelites adopting the Greek practices brought over by the Philistines. Yeah,
well, and the fact that they're using mosaics is saying that, they're using Greek practices. Mosaic is a Greek style of art.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So, yeah, well, and that's where you're having...
Sorry, I forgot my art history for a minute.
So, well, and that's the thing. You've got to bring all of the disciplines together to kind of get a bigger picture. And there is this idea that was originally the idea that was presented, that basically the Jews were going, hey, we're going to adopt these symbols and these ideas from the Greeks and we're going to use them. And people just kind of blew it off. And I mean, that's what we tend to do in Bible study. When we get something that contradicts the Bible that makes us uncomfortable, we just blow it off and act like it doesn't exist.
Right.
But
well, a lot of teachers do that. it always intrigued me. I was always like, well, what do we do with this information?
Well,
And then it just rolls around in the back of my head, wakes me up in the middle of the night, all that kind of stuff.
yeah, we aren't related at all. But yeah, the problem is, not only do we have mosaics with these Greek symbols and possibly a Greek god, we also have this thing where Jews were supposed to not create images. Remember the second commandment, don't create graven images.
Right.
And now, under the Talmud, actually mosaics were allowed, which I thought this was interesting. And the reason why mosaics were allowed was because they're in the floor. You aren't going to mistake that for an idol, so you weren't accidentally going to bow down to it.
That makes a whole lot of sense, actually.
I mean, right? This is the way their minds work, and I think this is the reason why I'm drawn to the way the rabbis argue through things.
Mm-hmm.
But there still is a problem, because why is there a Greek god? And so, anyway, we're going to return back to that. So that's the teaser. But other sources that we actually knew were out there, and it kind of surprised me to find that we have these sources that nobody was really taking seriously. We have First Enoch 8:3, and it says that astrology is evil,
okay,
and that it was taught by one of the fallen angels to humanity. So Enoch thoroughly renounces it.
Right.
The Sibylline oracles praises the righteous man who refuses to look for signs in the heavens. And these were probably written about the same time Paul was writing Corinthians.
Right.
So, goes way back there. Jubilees condemns astrology. Now, the idea is if you have to actively condemn something, then it needs to be present to be condemned. It had to pose some kind of threat, or why in the world would you take the time to write some condemnation of it, some official rejection of it?
Yeah, well, and that's actually, that's kind of funny. This actually kind of goes, we can apply this to our New Testament understanding, like with Paul's letters. That's one of the things that I think is kind of interesting too. A lot of times when we read Paul, we forget that he didn't just wake up one day and go like, this church needs a letter.
Right.
There was actually, and I wish we had the letters to Paul, because I want to know what they had to say.
Okay, so in one of the next topics that we're going to be talking about, women in leadership, that would totally solve like 98% of the controversy.
That would solve so much. But yeah, but yeah, whenever we look at things, the Bible wasn't written in a vacuum. Second Temple literature, Enoch, Jubilees, all those things were not written in a vacuum. They were written to try to explain how the world works. They were trying to explain how the scriptures are written, how we should apply them to everyday life. So yeah, I've been listening. I'm on like probably my fourth listen through of Miriam Brand's podcast. Since I've discovered, I've listened to it about twice a year. So
there's a lot of information she packs in. So, but he also, this seems like it would be kind of cut and dry because you do have these condemnations of it, but it's really not, because if you go back to First Enoch chapter 72, verses 1 through 37, not going to read it, so don't worry. But it adapts. Yes, it adapts the astrological signs and ideas to describe portals in heaven, these openings between heaven and earth.
Okay.
And it's an interesting chapter, and available online. I'll try to put a link up for anybody.
This isn't the plot of Stargate?
I'm sure, but Stargate may have been building on something. So Eusebius,
probably drawing from something,
right?
More than building on it.
Well, science fiction is the mythology of our day, so we can go off on that rabbit trail later. But Eusebius, he's a famous historian. He records a story in which Abraham teaches Pharaoh astrology. And in another account claims that Abraham taught astrology to the priest of Heliopolis. Well, if you remember, Heliopolis is the home of Joseph's wife, so Potiphar's daughter. Now, there's another work called the Treatise of Shem, and it constantly, throughout the whole thing, it advocates the use of astrology, says it's good, it's useful, and one sign does determine one's fate. Now, these are all Jewish writings. These are people who are very pro-Torah, very pro-Judaism. So we're starting to get into some muddy waters.
Okay.
So then we want to throw in the very questionable but often quoted Josephus. And he retells Genesis 12, but this is where God takes Abraham out and says, look at the stars. And they have the covenant where God tells Abraham, your descendants will be as the stars. And he describes this as an astrological event. And he talks about how Abraham looked up at the stars and he realized that the stars declared he was never going to have a child. And God said, no, that's not the case. I created the stars. I'm the one who control the stars.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, I'm going to move the stars to make them say whatever I want. And this is how he reframes the story in astrology.
Okay.
And he really uses it as a springboard to kind of explain why the Jews are more enlightened, advanced people than a lot of the Greeks saw them to be, or the Romans saw them to be. Because Abraham was presented as an astrologer. He was a Chaldean. And by the time Josephus was writing, all the Chaldeans were known as astrologers. This was kind of the byword for astrologers.
Okay.
So he also goes and he built on the idea that Eusebius had presented, that Abraham taught the Egyptian astrology. So Chaldeans, by the way, equals Babylonians. So the Babylonians,
Mm-hmm.
the Chaldeans, the Egyptians,
Okay.
they are the ones who know astrology. Now, this is the reason for this is, if you're going to study the stars, you aren't, and their patterns, you aren't going to do it overnight, literally. It's going to
you're
be
going to do it at night,
but not overnight.
Not just one night.
Right. So you've got to have these cultures and civilizations that have the ability to keep long records. So you can keep records over many decades and even centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And the only civilizations that did that were the Babylonians and the Egyptians. Well, who do you entrust with this kind of knowledge? You entrust your priest, the ones who keep a temple that's cared for and protected.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so it makes sense that astrology is part of the religion because they were the only ones who could keep it up. And so Josephus says that, Abraham takes this Babylonian, Chaldean information, goes to the Egyptians, teaches them, who and then in turn teach the Greeks. And so the Greek culture is therefore a byproduct of Jewish culture. And since the Romans, who were the ones that Josephus was alive under their rule, had stolen all Greek culture, Roman culture was therefore a product of Judaism.
Well, it's if that this is Josephus, you say?
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, you take Josephus for what you will, but,
right?
But the but if they were in fact taking from Jewish culture, it's only the parts they like,
right?
And so there's that. I mean, no one does that today, right?
Absolutely. But yeah, that's you're gonna get me sidetracked because but he really is. He's setting up this paradigm where all good things come from Judaism.
Right.
That you don't have anything good apart from Judaism. And he's saying that not only is Judaism greater, but Abraham was so smart that by looking at the stars, he was the one who discovers, notice the quotation marks, discovers monotheism. And so therefore, he's greater than all the Greeks with all their gods and the ability to discern that these many gods really don't have the power and control that the Greeks had ascribed to them. And it's really interesting because basically he's saying the Greek myths are just kind of a shadow of the Bible facts. And
which, I mean, we've seen some parallels and different stuff like that because you mentioned them anyway.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that's going on during Josephus' time is astrology is being condemned because it's seen as a politically unstabilizing force. And it's being used to take different leaders out. I mean, there's a whole big writing about it, which I'm not going to go into because you get into Roman history. And Josephus is saying, yes, it is good because we came up with it. But at the same time, he's drawing it back to where it is under God's control. And it's not about some kind of fate that is irrevocable.
Yeah.
So it becomes, really interesting because he does things like, at the same time, pseudo-Eupolemus. How's that for a name? He goes on, this is a Greek name, but he actually takes apart the Greek myths and he puts them together with biblical characters. So like Atlas from the Greek myths became Enoch.
Okay.
And he did some really interesting work there.
And I imagine, yeah.
Yeah.
To get him out from under the globe. No.
Precisely. But the thing is, whenever you're putting all this together, you got to keep track of the fact that we're looking at cultures that are clashing.
Mm-hmm.
We have so many cultures and nations within Rome, the Roman Empire, that are coming together, trying to figure out how all these things work together. And my God is better than your God. My belief is better than your belief. And Josephus really is trying to find a way to make Jews acceptable to the Romans.
Mm-hmm.
And he really worked hard at that. And so he really walks a fine line between praising astrology as a great achievement while portraying it as something very dangerous if misunderstood and misapplied. And because Josephus is a politician, you cannot read his stuff without realizing that he's a politician. So basically, by the time we get to the Second Temple, our approach to astrology within Judaism is very mixed. And the question for why is that? It's because, well, and some people aren't going to like this answer, the Bible is very mixed. And well,
I mean, I'm curious. I mean, I'm not discounting your.
I saw the wheels like suddenly fling into motion.
I'm curious to see where we go here. That's
okay. So if you flatly deny astrology, you're going to cite Deuteronomy 4:19, Deuteronomy 18:9 through 12, Isaiah 47:12 through 15, Jeremiah 8:2, and Jeremiah 10:2. And these are talking about finding a sign, seeking some kind of guidance. The problem is astrology is never specifically mentioned in any of those passages. So if you see these as a way to reject astrology, then you're saying that you see astrology being encompassed under these broader banners.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly. So the thing is, you can also come back with scriptures to endorse astrology. This would be Genesis 1:14. Where God puts the stars and the sun and the moon in the sky to mark the seasons.
Right.
Amos 5:8, which I probably should have looked that up before.
Amos, that's one of the little ones.
Yeah, that's one of those kind of hidden way in the back.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it.
Amos. Oh. And I thought I knew my Bible.
Well, I know it. It's just easy to pass over. There it is. Amos what?
5:8.
Amos 5:8.
Mm-hmm.
He made the Pleiades and Orion, and he turns deep darkness into morning, and darkness the day, and darkens the day into night. Who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the surface of the earth? The Lord is his name. Okay, so that kind of gives you a little bit of a flavor. This is Job 38:31 through 33. It says, "Can you bind the chains of Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth or in their season?" Mazzaroth is planets. "Or can you guide the bear with its children?" The bear. Ursa Major.
There you go. "And do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you establish their rule on earth?" So we've got these references to the stars. And of course, the wise men followed a star.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically we have Genesis 1:14, Amos 5:8, there's Psalms 19:1, Matthew 2:1 through 2, Job 38:31 through 33, which is what I just read, and of course Judges 5:20, where Deborah says the stars fought from their courses.
Mm-hmm.
So we have these, what I call the simple text, that seem to endorse the idea of astrology. If you want to take it further, then you go into what I call the more complex text, where we're looking at Jacob when he blesses his sons in Genesis 49.
Okay.
And each one of the sons is associated with some kind of symbol. And we've got the serpent, we've got the scorpion, we've got the wild ass, we've got all these different animals. And people are seeing these as being connected to the Zodiac. Now, there's some debate on which symbol goes with which one, because like Dan would be the scorpion or Scorpio.
Mm.
But some of them don't always line up well. Gemini, the twins, would be Simon and Levi because they're talked about together.
Okay.
So then you only have 11 brothers. Well, then you've got to bring in Dina, the daughter, so she's Virgo. And there's a lot of debate on how this works out.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Yeah, because it's at first it's like, oh, that really works. And then whenever you look at it, it's like, does it work as well as they want it to?
right.
Then also you have Genesis 37, Joseph's dream of the moon and the stars and the sun bowing down to him. They say that's an astrological event. The camp play out whenever they're going through the desert. The Psalms 19:4 says that the tabernacle is the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And so then all the other tribes are laid out around the tabernacle, and they're saying it's in accordance to the signs of the zodiac. The question for me is there any real basis for this claim, or is it just we have 12 signs of the zodiac, we have 12 tribes? It could be that simple.
Sure.
I don't want to read too much into that. But then you've got things like Revelation 12, which anybody who's listened to Heiser's talk about the birthday of Jesus.
Yeah, dating. Yeah, Jesus' birth. Yeah.
Yeah, because it is all astrological language. We've got the woman, Virgo. She's clothed in the sun, which when just basically the sun is coming up in the middle of the Virgo constellation.
Mm-hmm.
The moon's under her feet. There's a crown of 12 stars. The red dragon, which may be Scorpio. And Paul quotes from Psalms 19, and he writes this in Romans 10, referring about the elliptical courses of the planets in their orbits and how that works. And he talks about how that reveals the Gospels. So there's a difficulty in just dismissing this.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we can ask, is there anything to it? I think the question shouldn't be, is there truth behind the zodiac? I think the question should be, should we be engaging the zodiac?
Well, and how?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are we looking at it as the stars run our lives? Are we looking at it as we need to understand that we can use the, like Heiser using the astrological or astronomical software to actually, you can actually like
go back to any date,
check the position of the stars and planets on any date with this software. It's pretty cool. But of course, now it's really funny, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Heiser's podcast. I don't want to just like, I don't want to just rehearse his material, because anyone can go listen to that, and I didn't,
yeah, and by all means do.
Yeah, it's great stuff. But I did actually, I saw someone actually mention, well, why would, because we talk about this a lot. I'm sorry, I'm trying to make sure I've got all my ducks in a row in this thought. But, we talk about this a lot, how the Bible was written to people who would understand it.
Mm-hmm.
It was really funny because I was in a forum, it may have been the Naked Bible group, but someone had mentioned, well, why would the Bible be written in such a way that you could only figure out this date if you had this astronomical software to be able to, and I'm thinking, but the thing is, they were there.
Right.
Like
they could look out their window.
They could look out, yeah. It wasn't, they needed that because you have these astrologers and early astronomers, I guess, to a degree.
Well, it became astronomy.
Who have been keeping records of when this, you could go to a lot of these guys and be, hey, when was the last time the sun rose through Virgo with the moon at her feet? It's, and you could go, oh, well, it was, he could go back through his records and say, oh, it was this day, this year, this month, and this day.
Yeah.
And so it was, the guys were pretty astute.
And keeping track of the planetary movements was important, because this is how you determined what time of year it was.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And this was your calendar. So it wasn't just that, these great holy men of these various religions kept track. Even an average citizen would have some knowledge, some basic, maybe not, in depth, and couldn't be as precise as maybe the astrologers were, but they had some idea. I mean, Orion, that's most prevalent. We see it here in the winter.
Yeah.
And so I know that because I watch the sky, and just because it's really cool when you get to see a falling star. And anyway, but these are the things that were just part and parcel of being in that culture. And because of this, you really had this question of how far do you take it, because it is useful and it is somewhat necessary.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you know when to have Passover if you weren't watching the sky.
Right.
But at the same time, how much credence do you give it? And that's the debate that the rabbis picked up in the Talmud. And they had this really lengthy discussion. And they were discussing, does Israel have a mazel? Now, if you know the word mazel, you probably know it from Mazel Tov.
Mm-hmm.
And, we say, oh, well, it means good luck. It means congratulations. I asked in the paddle store, what people thought it meant. No one knew that it meant, good planet, essentially. It was a fortunate planet. And the debate of the rabbis is, does Israel have a mazel? Is there a planet that Israel is subject to? And, this was written shortly after, about 150 AD, shortly after the temple was destroyed. So this was right after Jesus was born, or lived and died, actually. And what they're trying to determine is, what is the proper Jewish view? And now, Jewish astrology is a little different. One of the forms, there's actually several different forms, and it became very involved when we started getting into Kabbalah.
Right.
One of the forms is that a person born on a certain day of the week should reflect whatever was created that day of the week. So, you have somebody with a bright and shining personality. They were created the day light was created.
Mm-hmm.
And this conversation between the rabbis, basically, one said, hey, if you're born on Sunday, you're going to have this characteristic. And another rabbi would say, no, I know Joe, and he was born that day of the week, and he's not that way at all. And another one would say, oh, well, if you're born on this, day of the week, Friday, then you're going to have this characteristic. He's like, oh, no, I know so-and-so. And it's back and forth. And they would go into the different accounts of the astrological events in the Bible that we've kind of already talked about. But then they would talk about stories where an astrologer came to a rabbi, like one of the astrologers came to Rabbi Akiva, and he said, your daughter's going to die on her wedding day. And he decided not to say anything about it, just go on about the business, get the wedding going. So she goes through the wedding. She finishes up all the ceremonial stuff, goes into her room. She takes her veil and she sticks it in the wall with a pen. Well, the next morning when she gets up and it's light and she can see, she realizes that the pen went through a snake's head. Now, Rabbi Akiva immediately begins to question her, what happened yesterday? What's going on? Because he realized that this was the snake that was supposed to kill her. And she began to talk about her day, and she mentions that there had been a man who was hungry and poor who had showed up at the wedding party, and no one had paid any attention to this guy. And the bride had gotten him food. And this basically illustrates the idea that no matter what your planets say, if you're following Torah, if you're practicing kindness and good works and charity, then you're going to be protected against any evil fate.
Okay.
So because your fate could be subverted through keeping the Torah and through doing these good works, you don't have a mazel. No mazel, no planet rules over you.
Okay. Interesting.
So, yeah. And just like Abraham was freed from the destiny of the stars, and did become a father of many nations because he obeyed God. And the early church fathers kind of followed this idea. Tertullian, Jerome, John Chrysostom, I always say that wrong, suggested that astrology was valid until the birth of Jesus. Origen, who attacked astrology viciously in many of his writings, he acknowledges that the stars are signs, but they don't cause the events. And it makes a certain amount of sense considering how frequently the star language in the Bible refers to angels.
Right.
So in Judges 5, when Deborah says, the stars fought, it's talking about angels there. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 19 through 20, it specifically says that the sun, moon, and stars are allotted to other nations. Well, we know that other nations were allotted to other God, lesser Elohim.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are we saying that these stars are actually lesser Elohim? No, we're saying they're representative, and they're kind of a sign. And Israel doesn't have a star.
Right.
It has a God. And Genesis 32, 8 and 9, which, God says, I've kept Israel, I've allotted the nations according to the sons of God, and I've kept Israel as my inheritance. It reminds us that God has retained control. Where everybody else might have a star or a mazel, Israel doesn't.
Right.
So we've got lots of star language in the Bible, and we talked about that on one of the other episodes. I believe it was with Deborah.
Yeah.
We'll have to get the link up for that. But Nehemiah 9:6 talks about how other nations worship the host of heavens. Job 38:7, the morning stars sang together. Isaiah 14:12-3, Satan is described as a star. And I think given the fact that these stars are equated with the angels, the real thing that we need to be asking ourselves is, when we look at astrology and try to use astrology to benefit us, are we actually saying these other gods have the control of our lives? And is that why we aren't supposed to do it? And that's where I come down on it. Right. I don't want us to ever put anything in more control or have more power over our lives than God himself. And that's the reason why the rabbis argued and said, no, we don't have a planet that rules us. And I think as Christians, we can say we don't have a planet that rules us. So since this is the Judges wrap-up episode, we'll tie it back in with Judges real quick. There's 12 judges. There's 12 constellations. I kind of think that's that 12 for 12 equation going on. And then also the explicit star language of Deborah kind of lends itself to be thinking about the whole book in this astrological phrase. But then we've got synagogues in Palestine, and they date about to the 4th or 6th century CE or AD. And Hamath Tiberias by the Sea of Galilee has representations that were originally assumed to be Helios, the Greek god of the sun, in the center of the zodiac, like I was talking earlier. It was the first of 6 synagogues that featured Helios, either on his own or with chariots. In Galilee, we have 2 synagogues dating back to the 2nd or 3rd century, and the excavations on them began in 2011, so these are still pretty new finds.
Yeah, that's very new.
Oh yeah, for archaeology, it's amazing. And we have several, in those 2 synagogues specifically, we have several representations from Samson's life. He's engaged in battle. He's removing the gates of Gaza, the foxes in pairs with the torches, him fighting with the jawbone and the ass. And first of all, he wasn't recognized as Samson. They thought maybe this was David and Goliath.
Right.
Maybe it was King Og, because Samson is represented as this giant. And also included in there, I should point out, were representations of the Maccabees. And because this is when Jews are under the control of the Roman Empire and things are going wrong. And these hero stories are so important. So they do want to deliver. They want a judge, just like Samson was, who fought back the Philistines.
Right.
They're in that same area. And it seems that they are really equating the Romans with the Philistines. And Jacob, in his blessing to his son, said that a judge would come and he would be from the tribe of Dan. Well, Samson's from the tribe of Dan. And apocalyptic thought at this point is rampant, as demonstrated by the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Sure, yeah.
And we're seeing, again, that exposure to Greek art and thought and influence. And they're beginning to blend together, and they're beginning to put Jewish icons or, heroes, where they're beginning to blend them with Greek heroes. So it makes sense that when we have these temples or these synagogues that have spanned this time frame, where you go from strict biblical representation of Samson without the zodiac, but then as you move forward and the cultures become more embedded in each other and more enmeshed, then you start to shorthand it. And you start to use symbols that work for your time and your place.
Yeah.
So if you want to, and Samson is the perfect fit for the sun god. His name means little sun.
Right.
So I think, and now this is just me, I think that what we're seeing with the progression from those second and third century synagogues to the 4th and 6th is where we're moving away from Samson as being a straight up Jewish representation of an idea into the more synchronistic idea of the Greek symbols taking center stage in the synagogues.
Mm-hmm.
So,
No, I am curious about that because I think that would be really interested to find some more information on it. I'm sure we'll find more out as
right.
the excavation and study continues. But when you're talking about using symbols that people understand, it's like the church has had kind of a struggle with that for years. It's what do you use? What do you change? I mean, you were talking. I remember we've talked a few times about in the Bible when Jesus said he's the bread of life, and certain cultures they don't, only rich people have bread,
right?
And so they would assume that only rich people have access to Jesus, or was it George we were talking to that the parable of the lost sheep became the parable of the lost duckling?
Yes.
In one translation, just because they were trying to put something there that people understand, and it's like, well, where does that line end? Where does it?
That's a really good question.
At what point are we dipping into the dangerous area? So that's
No, I mean, it's a good question. I think it's one that we need to ask ourselves. We've been in churches where people have taken a secular song and sang it during a Sunday morning worship service, and people have freaked out.
Yeah.
And, is that appropriate? And, I often say Pink's "Please Don't Leave Me" is one of my favorite worship songs. Yeah. And, people don't understand that. But then people who know my walk and my journey kind of go, oh, well, that kind of actually makes sense now that I know you. And, and in my mind, that has nothing to do with Pink, what she may or may not stand for as a person. She just created a song that worked really well for my purposes.
Sure.
So that's something I think we have to kind of wrestle with in our own life. But, everything has got something attached to it. And this is something I notice. Wind chimes. Our grandmother loved wind chimes all over the place. They were originally to scare the evil spirits away. So do we hang wind chimes up as a way to, remember our grandmother, or are we hanging wind chimes up to scare evil spirits away? Where do we draw that line? And, I love the smell of burning sage. Do I believe that smudging a home or location is effective? And is it something I'm allowed to do?
Right.
Where is that line? And I think this is why we have to be in relationship with God and not necessarily trying to do things by a rule book, because if we keep trying to separate ourselves from anything that has any kind of evil connotation, pretty soon we aren't going to have anything left. Right. And, I know for a fact that one of the hottest selling things in the occult realm is super large print Bible copies of the Psalms. And the idea is that it can lay on the floor and you can stand up and read it while you cast your spell. So does this mean we get rid of the Psalms?
Right.
So these are things that I think Israel was really wrestling with early on, but we've got to this point where, as far as with astrology, but we got to this point where we just immediately said, no, there's no basis to it. There's no reason for believing it. And they're having to work out, where does this fit? And because they did need astrology, because astronomy wasn't around yet, they needed astrology just to fulfill the basic commandments of the Torah.
Right.
So as far as keeping feasts and festivals and stuff. So.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, and the Bible starts out in Genesis saying that God put the stars to be a sign for the seasons. And so which I'm surprised that didn't come up sooner in the discussion.
I did mention it. You missed it.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's Genesis 1:14.
I had to work. Maybe it was during the work text. Or did you just list the reference in the?
I said it, and then because that is just for anybody who doesn't believe me. It says, "And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be the lights in the expanse of the heavens, give light upon the earth." And it was so.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is how every culture at that point in time marked time. And, think about it, because our grandmother planted by the almanac too. And so if you know that at a certain time of year you plant squash, they're going to do better than at another time of year.
Mm-hmm.
So you start to pay attention to that, and you begin to orient your planting cycle around these certain phases of the moon and these times when certain constellations are on the rise. Now, how easy is it to translate that into human behavior?
Right.
If the planets have that, I mean, that's what they're seeing it as. If the planets have that big of effect upon my plants and my garden, then surely they have to have some kind of effect on me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's where we get into correlation and causation.
Right. And the thing is, if you're just looking at a very basic observation of cause and effect, well, you get it. I mean, it makes sense because we come to this with so much scientific knowledge that we don't even realize we've absorbed that they just did not have. I mean, if you're starting at square one, where do you begin? You begin by simple observation. Mm-hmm. And if you don't understand that those big bright, well, little tiny lights out in the night sky are great big balls of gas millions of miles away, then you start with the wrong premise.
Right.
And where the Bible, and not just the Bible, as we talked about in earlier episodes, present angels and stars together, then not only are the stars having an impact, then it must be these gods.
Right.
And
yeah, it's on a side note, as we're talking about the stars and constellations and things like that, I do find it interesting. I read an article that was, and I'll have to see if I can find it. It was a list of oddly specific things that humans do everywhere.
Okay.
And it looked at just random stuff. I mean, the kind of stuff I like to read. And then, but one of the things was, it was like at least four of the major constellations are called the same thing by almost every known culture.
That's interesting.
So regardless of their location on the planet.
Well, I mean, but then we're going back to the Babylon Egyptian connection.
And I'm just guessing at that point, at that number. I would have to look it up for the specific number. So.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, it makes sense because I mean, all these cultures, I mean, they're trading information back and forth at various times. And so, yeah, you're building on what everybody else is bringing to the table. And if most of it starts there in the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia or around that area, then it makes sense that you have a shared language. Now, for me, where it gets interesting is when we start talking about China or South America.
Exactly. They even went, they went into some of that where it was cultures that should never have had contact.
Unless you leave I believe a biblical account where we're all children of Noah. And so if we're all children of Noah, then, then there was some kind of connection.
Right.
And I don't think you can get away from truth. I think that Paul is 100% correct when in Romans he talks about natural revelation and how the earth does declare God's glory. And I think that's...
You take Paul seriously on that?
I do. And I honestly, okay, so rabbit trail. I think one of the other things wrong with humanity is that we spend all of our time in these little boxes with artificial light, artificial atmosphere. We are not exposing ourselves to see God revealed in nature. Now, I'm not saying God's in a tree. God is in a tree, but God is not in a tree. That
He's near the tree, but he's not the tree.
He's not the tree. Yeah, but we see, his need for symmetry. We see his precision. We see the need for balance and light and water, and we see how he creates...
I'd say his preference. I don't think need.
Well, okay. Yeah, his preference. Yeah, well, the need for it in his creation. But I do think God is a God of balance, and I think God is a God of order, and these things come out and they're manifest in his creation. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense to me that there is a system that displays these great truths about him. And I think he's highly creative that way. And I think he's creative in ways that would blow our mind if we would just stop and look. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we grew up watching Donald Duck and Mathemagic Land.
Yeah.
And the golden rule and the golden rectangle and not golden rule.
Golden ratio.
Golden ratio.
Golden ratio, the golden rectangle, golden spiral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That stuff is mind blowing whenever you see how often it occurs in nature. And that,
And what's crazy to me as an artist is whenever I attempt to paint something, if I break rules of composition and balance, most of the time it looks like a mess. But God does it all the time and it still works. And it's just, I think having that eye for what he's revealing within creation is what makes, I don't know, to me, I don't want to say it's as profound as what I find in the Bible, but there's something that very much complements what I find in the Bible.
Sure.
And I think we've lost sight of that. And, I think people who pray are people who are in touch with just God's creation. I mean, look at farmers. You never met anyone who prayed as hard as a farmer with a hailstorm on the horizon.
Right.
And it's natural. It's not something you have to be taught. It just springs from within you.
Right.
And so these ancient cultures, that's what they were doing. They were at the mercy of the elements. They were at the mercy of the gods. Now, which God was it? And was it a God who would move on your behalf, or was it a God who had set a fate and determined it and you could not escape it? Was he an intimate God, or was he a God who was, wound up the universe and walked away?
Right.
And that's the thing about Israel not having a mazel, about us not having a mazel. We have a God who responds, who just like, if the story of Abraham was true, I don't think it literally is, but I think there's a lesson there. Just like Abraham saying, I can't have kids because the stars say I can't. But God saying, doesn't matter what the stars said. And matter of fact, as we go through, I've got some other stuff we're going to be talking about that basically over and over again, what I'm finding in scripture is God saying, it doesn't matter where you were born, who your parents are, what your nationality is. None of this matters. You just got to keep looking for me.
Right.
And I think ultimately that's where the story of the wise men come in. They were the wrong religion. They were the wrong race, but they were looking for the king. And that's the reason why they found him. So I think if we just keep looking, eventually we're going to find him.
Well, and I think now this is something when you were talking about that, I don't think it's necessarily, okay, I don't think we have to even start our journey looking for him specifically.
Right.
I think
You mean you don't have to have the right label?
Well, okay, so I might get kind of controversial. I think we start our journey looking at there's something wrong.
Okay.
Either with the world or with us.
Okay. Usually with us.
I mean, if you look at I can never remember this guy's name. The general who went to the prophet, who bathed in the Jordan. Naaman. I don't know why I can never remember his name. But Naaman. I mean, he said, I'm going to lose everything.
Right.
And he asked around for who's the person who can fix this. Mm-hmm. And it turned out to be one of the prophets of Yahweh.
Right.
And again, wrong religion,
wrong nationality.
And
he's unclean on top of it.
Yeah. And exactly. And so that's actually kind of what I thought of whenever you mentioned that it was, we can start our journey just looking to be healed, but we have to start actually looking.
What does it take to get us to move? I think that's a big question that all of us need to be looking at. And sometimes it is pain. Mm-hmm. And I think, for some of us, it's legitimate, like real tangible pain. And for others, it's kind of, I'm not saying esoteric pain or existential pain is less.
Right.
It's probably even more so, but most of us don't move and we don't act until we're kind of forced into that corner. And I know that's true for me. And so, yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, I'm with you as far as you don't have to be looking for God specifically, but you need to be looking for a solution for something. Mm-hmm. And where's that solution lie? And I think if we're being honest, eventually we're going to get to the point where we recognize only the creator can address the needs of the creation. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's the coolest part about Christianity. We get to have a relationship with the creator. And no other religion offers that.
Yep.
Every other religion gives you, good ideas, great ways to treat each other, rules of behavior, but none of the rest of them say you actually get to know the God who cared enough to make you.
Yeah. Well, it's like the interview with George, where he says, all the other religions are do better, try better, do the rituals, and then if the gods are having a good day when you die,
yes.
then you might get to make it into Nirvana or wherever.
Right. Yeah. And if you haven't listened to the episode with George, be sure and catch that, because that was so much fun.
Yeah, it was a good episode. And so, anyway, do we have anything we can throw in real quick, or are we going to just kind of have a short one this week?
I think we're going to have a short one this week, because everything you gave me to research, I just fell off the deep end on.
I didn't assign her things to research. It's just things that we mentioned along the way that we thought might be cool to address. It's not like I'm some kind of taskmaster.
Yes, he is. No,
I've been keeping notes, and I just sent you my notes. That's all that happened.
Yeah, no.
So,
that's the thing with me. I got into the Zodiac stuff, and I had to actually stop and go, okay, I'm not going that far, because I did not even crack the Zohar. So you need to be thankful I didn't go there. Which is,
well, I mean, what? I mean, what's wrong with going there? I mean, we've got time. I mean, there's nothing.
Right.
But no, and just to be clear, we're not saying, this is still a question that we're asking. This is about where does this fit? We're not saying go out and plan your day by the horoscope.
No.
That's a terrible idea. Plant your crops by the position of the constellations. That's fine. But other than that, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know where I was going with that.
No, well, I mean, okay, no, I think it comes down to, where's your allegiance? And are you going to say your fate and destiny are determined by your cooperation with God in creating it, or that there's another God represented by these stars that is going to have more control? And I never want to put another God in control of my life.
Right.
Because they don't care about me. I mean, that's simple. They don't care about me, and they don't care about the things I care about or the people I care about, where our God does. And so it doesn't matter what star you're born under, what day of the week you're born under. It does not matter. What matters is, are you willing to participate with God as he's bringing about his plan and the future that he has created for this world? And are we stepping into it together with him? And so I think that's where we need to be, because God doesn't care what the other gods say about his children.
Cool. So. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. So everyone, thanks for joining us. Next week, we're going to grab something else out of the pile here in no particular order and see where that takes us. Hopefully found this interesting and informative. I'm still trying to figure out what I think of all of it. And I don't know, maybe we'll let you know in a future episode. But until then, if you want to be part of the conversation, if you have an opinion, RavenCreekSC.com gets you to basically everything we have. Hit us up on social media at RavenCreekSC, and we'll be glad to hear from you. If you do like what you heard and want to, help keep things running, feel free to hit up Patreon at RavenCreekSC. Also, just RavenCreekSC. If you just put that into any website, just see what comes up. So, I'm kidding.
So far, we're good. I checked it.
So yeah. Anyway, yes, but yeah, hit us up, be part of the conversation, feel like contributing, cool. If not, please share. And in the meantime, just keep on thinking the weird thoughts that bring you back here. So we'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, a Raven Creek Social Club production. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you like what you've heard, please write us a review on iTunes or consider supporting us on patreon.com/RavenCreekSC. As always, thank you for listening, and don't forget to join us next week.